So I want you to picture this. You're standing on the sunny streets of Dallas, Texas.
Mm.
It's exactly 12:03 p.m. Central Standard Time, Friday, November 22, 1963. And the sky is just this, like, brilliant, clear blue.
Yeah, a perfect day.
Exactly. The crowds are absolutely roaring around you. And there, gliding past in the back of an open-top Lincoln convertible, are President John F. Kennedy and the First Lady, Jacqueline Kennedy.
Looking completely radiant.
Yeah, just the ultimate picture of American optimism. And then, in a matter of literally seconds, that entire picture just completely shattered.
It really is a moment that it fundamentally fractured the American timeline.
Yeah.
Like there is a before that moment and an after that moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
So welcome to this deep dive. Our mission today is to navigate the massive, incredibly tangled, and frankly, often entirely contradictory web of source materials surrounding that exact pivot point in history.
Because it is a lot to sift through.
It is. We're looking at everything from the official 1964 Warren Commission reports to investigative journalism, declassified files, and even some deathbed confessions, all just to try and understand what really happened.
And I am endlessly fascinated by why this specific historical event still captivates us, over 60 years later.
Oh, for sure.
To me, it feels like the ultimate locked room mystery. Except the room was a wide-open public plaza, right? And it unfolded in broad daylight in front of hundreds of witnesses. I mean, how does a mystery survive that kind of visibility?
Well, I think the paradox of Dealey Plaza is that the visibility actually bred the confusion. You really have to look at the logistics of that day to understand how vulnerability was essentially just baked right into the event.
Okay, where do we start?
Let's start with the motorcade route itself. It was chosen by Secret Service agents Winston G. Lawson and Forrest V. Sorrells. And their primary goal wasn't actually security.
Wait, really? What was it?
It was maximum public exposure. You have a president who was trying to secure Texas for his upcoming re-election campaign.
Ah, right. Which inherently means you have to slow the vehicle down and navigate a lot of tight turns so people can see him.
Exactly. That route forced the motorcade to maneuver through sharp corners, particularly this really notorious 120-degree hairpin turn onto Elm Street.
Right in front of the Texas School Book Depository.
Yes. That turn physically forced the driver to slow that huge, heavy Lincoln convertible down to an absolute crawl. We're talking around 11 miles per hour.
Which is just, the numbers in the advanced security report are staggering to me.
They are wild.
Because the sources note that advanced Secret Service agents realize there were over 20,000 windows overlooking this specific parade route. 20,000.
Yeah, an impossible number.
And because they simply didn't have the manpower to secure them, they opted to inspect exactly 0 of them. Like, none.
It just highlights a completely different era of presidential security.
Mm-hmm.
The sheer arithmetic of the threat landscape was just overwhelming to the agents on the ground.
It's like trying to waterproof a screen door. You can lock the actual doors on the street level all you want, but structurally, it's just impossible to secure a route with that many unchecked vantage points. It was a vulnerability just waiting to be exploited.
It really was. And so, as the motorcade rolled past the depository, the shots rang out. In the span of just 8.6 seconds, all that sunny optimism turned into absolute chaos.
Right.
The driver hit the gas, racing to nearby Parkland Memorial Hospital. But the physical damage was just catastrophic. By 1:00 p.m., so just 30 minutes later, President Kennedy was pronounced dead.
The emotional toll of that immediate aftermath, it's difficult to process even reading about it today. You've got these hardened Secret Service agents with tears just streaming down their faces outside the emergency room.
The entire nation was thrown into this collective state of shock.
Yeah, and the visuals broadcast to the public were so stark. Just a few hours later, you have Lyndon B. Johnson taking the oath of office on Air Force One. And standing right next to him is Jacqueline Kennedy, still wearing that iconic pink suit, but it's now splattered with her husband's blood.
That image was broadcast to a nation that was just trying to comprehend the unthinkable. And, the grief culminated shortly after with a state funeral.
The scale of that funeral was massive.
Huge. We're talking about an estimated 800,000 onlookers lining the streets of Washington, D.C., and perhaps the most evocative symbol of that grief was the riderless horse in the procession, a horse named Blackjack.
With the boots reversed in the stirrups.
Right, a visceral representation of a fallen leader looking back at his troops one last time. It was a moment of profound national mourning. But while the public wept, the gears of law enforcement were grinding incredibly fast.
Almost unbelievably fast, honestly.
Yeah.
By 2:04 p.m. that exact same day, a suspect is already under arrest. A 24-year-old named Lee Harvey Oswald. He's apprehended in a movie theater.
Yeah.
But interestingly, he wasn't initially arrested for the president's assassination. He was arrested for fatally shooting a Dallas patrolman named J.D. Tippit about 45 minutes after Kennedy was shot.
The swiftness of that arrest gave the nation a face to project their anger onto, you know. And we have to examine how the Warren Commission eventually profiled Oswald. Because on paper, he looked like the perfect lone gunman.
Right. Let's look at his background. Because he wasn't just a civilian. He was a former Marine who had earned a sharpshooter qualification before getting an undesirable discharge.
Exactly.
And politically, he was a Marxist who had actually defected to the Soviet Union for a few years before returning to Texas.
Right, so you combine that ideological profile with the physical evidence they tied to him. They found a 6.5 millimeter Italian Carcano rifle with a telescopic sight.
And he bought that through the mail, right?
Yes, purchased via mail order under an alias that traced back to Oswald. So
Right.
you have the training, the political ideology, and the weapon.
It's a neat, tidy package. But, and this is where the investigative journalism really starts to clash with the official government reports.
Oh, absolutely.
Despite this seemingly perfect profile, Oswald's behavior in custody doesn't match the typical psychological profile of a politically motivated assassin.
He didn't claim the glory.
No. He vehemently denied it. He was paraded in front of reporters and famously yelled, "I didn't shoot anybody. No, sir, I'm just a patsy."
And that phrase, that single phrase, is what cracked the door open for decades of skepticism.
Yeah.
Because an ideological assassin usually wants their manifesto read, right? They want the world to know why they struck a blow against the system.
Exactly.
So Oswald's absolute denial forces investigators to look closer at the physical evidence. If he was framed, as he claimed, does the crime scene actually point to someone else?
So let's examine the Warren Commission's official narrative here, because their entire conclusion rests on this idea that Oswald acted completely alone, firing 3 shots from that depository window in exactly 8.6 seconds.
That's the official timeline.
Right. And to make that mathematical timeline work, they had to introduce what critics call the magic bullet theory. I need you to break down the mechanics of this for me because it sounds physically impossible.
Okay, so this is the crux of the forensic debate. The Warren Commission concluded that of the 3 shots fired, 1 missed the vehicle entirely.
Okay.
The 3rd shot was the fatal headshot. That leaves the 2nd shot. According to the official report, this single bullet hit President Kennedy in the upper back, exited through his neck, and then struck Governor Connally, who was sitting in the jump seat ahead of him.
Okay, so it passes through Kennedy and hits Connally. That part I follow.
But then, according to the commission, that same bullet struck Connally in the back, shattered his rib, exited his chest, shattered his right wrist, and finally embedded itself in his left thigh.
I mean, if you were listening to this, look down at your own wrist and feel your own ribs. Think about the sheer density of bone mass we are talking about here.
It's significant.
I understand that Full Metal Jacket bullets can penetrate multiple targets. But how does a bullet act like a pinball, tearing through heavy bone, cartilage, and muscle across 2 different human bodies, and then just fall out onto a hospital stretcher in almost pristine condition?
Yeah, that's the big question.
Because the bullet they found on Connally's Stretcher Commission Exhibit 399, it wasn't crushed or heavily mangled. It was virtually intact.
And that is the exact anatomical and physical puzzle that has fueled skepticism for decades.
Oh.
From a ballistic physics standpoint, many independent experts argue that striking thick, dense bones like a human rib and a wrist, it should severely deform a bullet. It should flatten it or tear it apart.
Right.
But the investigative discrepancies don't stop with the magic bullet. We also have to look at the shot that missed.
Oh, right, the first shot.
Yeah. A spectator named James T. Tague was standing down near the triple underpass, and he was actually struck in the cheek by a fragment from a bullet that hit the concrete curb near him. So if you account for the magic bullet, the fatal headshot, and the shot that hit Tague's curb, you are 3 shots. That is the absolute maximum of what Oswald's bolt-action Carcano rifle could mechanically fire, eject, and reload in an 8.6-second window.
Which means if there is even one more bullet, the entire lone gunman theory completely collapses.
Exactly.
And the sources point to a 1978 investigation by the House Select Committee on Assassinations that utilized acoustic research on a police dictabelt. For anyone unfamiliar, What exactly is a dictabelt, and how does it prove anything about bullet counts?
So a dictabelt was a recording technology used by police dispatchers at the time. It recorded audio onto a continuous loop of plastic.
Yeah.
And a police motorcycle in the motorcade actually had its microphone stuck in the open position.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it was broadcasting the ambient sound of Dealey Plaza back to headquarters.
So they basically had an accidental audio recording of the entire assassination.
Yes. And in 1978, acoustic experts analyzed the echo patterns on that dictabelt. By measuring how the sound waves bounced off the specific buildings in Dealey Plaza, they could triangulate the origin points of the noises.
And what did they find?
Their analysis found 6 points of echo patterns indicating a high probability of a fourth shot. And a fourth shot mathematically necessitates a second gunman, likely positioned on the grassy knoll.
And the grassy knoll is where the sources get into some truly chilling territory regarding the physical evidence, because we have the alleged deathbed confession of a dying CIA data analyst.
Yes, this is a major claim.
We're talking about an intelligence professional claiming he saw the original, unedited version of the famous Zapruder film.
Right, Abraham Zapruder's 8mm home movie. It's arguably the most scrutinized piece of film in history, since it captures the entire sequence of the shooting.
And this analyst claimed that the version released to the public was missing crucial frames. He stated that in the unedited film, right as the fatal shot occurs, there is a visible puff of gun smoke drifting up from behind the wooden picket fence on the grassy knoll.
Which would prove a frontal shot.
Exactly. If true, that is physical proof. But his confession goes even further. He alleged that he was present when original autopsy photos from Bethesda Naval Hospital were heavily retouched.
To alter the wounds.
Yeah, to move a massive exit wound from the back of the skull to the side, specifically to support the government's narrative of a shot coming from behind.
And, this raises an incredibly important point about the nature of evidence in our justice system. The best, most definitive way to resolve these forensic contradictions, testing the physics of the magic bullet, examining the acoustic echoes, cross-examining the missing film frames, all of that would have been sorted out in a thorough public trial for Lee Harvey Oswald.
Yeah, the evidence would have been subject to rigorous legal scrutiny. But he never made it to trial. He was permanently silenced before he could ever take the stand.
On Sunday, November 24th, so just 2 days after the assassination, Oswald was being transferred from the Dallas Police Headquarters basement to a more secure county jail.
Right.
And he's surrounded by police detectives with live television cameras rolling and broadcasting to millions of homes. And suddenly, a local nightclub owner named Jack Ruby steps out of the crowd and shoots Oswald point blank in the stomach.
It is hard to overstate how shocking that scenario is. I mean, a suspect murdered on live national television inside a police station surrounded by armed guards.
Unprecedented.
And the official defense for Jack Ruby was that he was just a grieving, patriotic citizen.
Yeah.
His lawyers claimed his sorrow over Kennedy's death caused him to suffer from a condition called psychomotor epilepsy.
Yeah, the defense team argued that this neurological condition triggered a temporary fugue state. Essentially a localized brain misfire that caused him to perform complex, involuntary actions unconsciously, driven purely by his grief.
But come on, when investigative journalists dug into Ruby's actual background, that grieving citizen narrative completely falls apart.
It really does.
Declassified files reveal that Jack Ruby wasn't just a random nightclub owner. He had been an FBI informant since the 1950s. And more importantly, he had deep, documented ties to organized crime syndicates.
Right.
He worked as a bagman and associate for incredibly powerful mafia bosses like Carlos Marcello in New Orleans and Santo Trafficante.
A bagman being someone who collects and distributes illicit mob money.
Right. So let me get this straight. A guy with mob ties and FBI connections just happens to slip into a highly secure police basement and execute the most important prisoner in American history.
It's quite the coincidence.
It is the ultimate dead men tell no tales strategy. If you are running a conspiracy, shooting the primary suspect before he can consult a lawyer or testify is exactly what you would do to stop an investigation in its tracks.
And Ruby's own behavior post-arrest strongly suggests he knew he was a pawn in a larger game. During his testimony for the Warren Commission, his mental state was visibly deteriorating.
He was terrified, wasn't he?
He was. He made these desperate, paranoid pleas directly to Chief Justice Earl Warren. He explicitly stated that the true facts of what occurred would never come above board if he stayed in Dallas.
Wow.
He begged Warren to take him to Washington, D.C., promising to tell the whole truth if he was guaranteed safety. But Warren refused the request. Ruby died in prison of cancer a few years later, taking whatever he really knew to the grave.
Which leaves historians with a massive void. Because the truth effectively died with Oswald and Ruby, investigators are forced to reverse engineer the crime by looking at motives. Who actually benefited from the assassination?
Before we dive into the theories surrounding who benefited, it is crucial to lay out a very clear disclaimer here.
Yes.
The sources provided involve incredibly politically charged figures. We're talking left-wing elements, right-wing elements, massive government agencies. Our goal is impartially recording the content found in these source materials. We are not endorsing any of these viewpoints, but simply synthesizing the historical arguments that attempt to explain the assassination.
Totally. We are just the messengers of the deep dive. And looking at the sources, what really stands out is that it wasn't just one isolated grievance against Kennedy. It was a compounding series of policies that created a domino effect, alienating multiple massive power structures, all at the exact same time.
A perfect storm.
Exactly. Let's start with the mafia.
The mafia had a very clear, documented motive. The Kennedy administration, spearheaded by Attorney General Robert Kennedy, the president's brother, had launched an unprecedented, relentless crusade against organized crime.
They were going hard after them.
They were aggressively prosecuting the very mob bosses Jack Ruby was associated with, like Sam Giancana and Carlos Marcello. So the historical theory argues that the mob helped get Kennedy elected through union influence, felt deeply betrayed by the crackdowns, and retaliated.
It makes sense that the mafia felt betrayed domestically, but on a global scale, the timeline puts us in 1963. That's just a year after the Cuban Missile Crisis. That has to make the Soviets and the KGB primary suspects, right?
The Cold War context is absolutely vital here. The Cuban Missile Crisis had brought the world to the brink of nuclear annihilation, and the Soviet Union felt deeply humiliated by the eventual diplomatic outcome.
And Oswald had ties to them.
Right. Oswald's time as a defector in the USSR and his pro-communist activities made Soviet involvement a natural suspicion. However, many intelligence experts analyzed that the KGB wouldn't risk using a known former defector because the connection would be too obvious and could trigger World War III.
Which brings us to the intelligence community closer to home. Because the sources spend a lot of time on the severe tension between President Kennedy and the CIA, as well as the military-industrial complex.
The animosity there was profound. It started with the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961. The CIA had trained a covert army of Cuban exiles to overthrow Fidel Castro.
And it didn't go well.
No. When the invasion faltered on the beaches, the CIA begged Kennedy for U.S. air support. But Kennedy refused, not wanting a direct military conflict with Cuba and the Soviets. The invasion failed spectacularly.
And Kennedy famously fired the powerful CIA director, Allen Dulles, right after that disaster. He reportedly said he wanted to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. That makes for some serious enemies.
Furthermore, Kennedy was pursuing a policy of detente with the Soviets and had expressed a desire to withdraw American advisors from Vietnam. This terrified the military brass, who believed his policies were dangerously soft on communism.
And there's a specific confession related to this, right?
Yes. This theory gained major traction due to E. Howard Hunt, a former CIA officer heavily involved in covert operations. On his deathbed, Hunt allegedly confessed to his son that he was part of a chain of command in the assassination plot, implicating high-level CIA figures and stating that the fatal headshot was actually taken by a French gunman stationed on the grassy knoll.
There is even a financial motive outlined in the sources regarding Executive Order 11110. The claim is that this order threatened the Federal Reserve's monopoly on currency creation. But how exactly does a piece of paper threaten the Federal Reserve?
Well, Executive Order 11110 authorized the Treasury Department to issue silver certificates. So, currency backed directly by physical silver bullion held in the Treasury vault.
Okay.
Conspiracy researchers argue this effectively bypassed the Federal Reserve, which is a central banking system that creates money and loans it to the government at interest. By issuing debt-free currency, Kennedy was supposedly stepping on the toes of incredibly powerful financial institutions.
It feels like everywhere Kennedy turned, he was making enemies of giants. And this is why the concept of a convergence of interests is so prominent in these sources. The idea that it wasn't just one rogue group, but a shadow network where their motives aligned.
Exactly.
Like the mob provided the logistics on the ground, the CIA provided the institutional cover-up, and the military just looked the other way.
It's a compelling theory for a lot of people.
But amidst all these grand geopolitical theories, the sources also highlight some bizarre, highly specific anomalies, like the Umbrella Man.
Oh, the Umbrella Man. He is one of the most debated figures in Dealey Plaza.
It's a detail that sounds completely fabricated, but it is actually captured on multiple films. There is a man, later identified as Louis Stephen Witt, standing right near the grassy knoll as the motorcade approaches.
Right.
It is a perfectly clear, sunny, beautiful Texas day. Nobody else has rain gear, but Witt is standing there, holding an open, stark black umbrella, and exactly as Kennedy's car passes him, he pumps the umbrella, and the shots begin.
Some theories propose that the umbrella was a visual signal to coordinate the timing of the sniper fire, or even a highly modified weapon itself that fired a paralyzing dart into the president's neck, setting him up for the fatal headshot.
Hang on, I'm having trouble buying that. I mean, if you are a highly trained, elite assassination ring operating in the shadows, are you really going to use a cartoonish Mary Poppins umbrella signal in broad daylight while cameras are rolling? It seems incredibly absurd.
Many historians agree with your skepticism there. In fact, the umbrella man is often used to illustrate a psychological concept called apophenia.
Apophenia.
Yeah. It's the human tendency to perceive meaningful connections between entirely unrelated things, especially in the wake of a massive trauma. We desperately want the anomalies to mean something.
So what was he actually doing?
Well, Louis Stephen Witt actually came forward voluntarily in the 1970s to testify before the House Select Committee. His explanation was that the umbrella was a highly specific, obscure political protest.
A protest.
Yeah. He claimed it was a reference to former British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, who famously carried a black umbrella. Witt was protesting what he saw as the appeasement policies of the Kennedy family, dating back to JFK's father, Joseph Kennedy, who had been an ambassador to the UK and supported Chamberlain.
Wow. I mean, if that's true, it is an unbelievably tragic coincidence of timing that he chose that exact moment to open his umbrella.
It really speaks to the density of the event. Every single detail, every bystander in Dealey Plaza that day has been subjected to a microscopic level of analysis. And that is what happens when the official government narrative leaves so many physical and logical questions unanswered.
So let's pull all these threads together. We started with a vulnerable motorcade crawling at 11 miles per hour through a canyon of 20,000 unchecked windows.
A logistical nightmare.
Right. We have an official Warren Commission report relying on a pristine magic bullet that seemingly defies anatomical physics. We have a suspect claiming to be a patsy who was silenced on live television by an FBI informant with deep mob ties. And we have a convergence of powerful enemies from the CIA to the Mafia to the KGB, all with clear, documented motives to want the president gone. It truly was the most debated 8.6 seconds in American history.
And 60 years of analyzing timelines, acoustic dictabelts, and deathbed confessions has arguably given the public more theories than hard, undeniable facts. But the persistence of those theories is deeply revealing about a profound shift in the national psyche.
Which leaves me with a lingering thought for you to mull over. Consider how much energy has been spent debating bullet trajectories and forensic anomalies over the last 6 decades.
So much energy.
But does discovering the exact identity of the gunman, whether it was Oswald acting alone, a French sniper on the grassy knoll, or a mafia hitman, does it even matter anymore?
That's the real question.
Or is the true lasting tragedy of November 22, 1963, not just the physical loss of a president, but the permanent death of the American public's unquestioning trust in their own institutions? Because once that open-top Lincoln sped away from Dealey Plaza and into the shadows of the underpass, the innocent belief that things are exactly as they seem never really came back into the light.